And we're live. Hey everyone, what's up? I'm Asani Fisher. I am once again being joined by my friend Aaron Jones for what I guess is now going to be referred to as the SCS podcast. I initially was just doing an NBA season preview, but I've decided to turn this into a regular NBA podcast, and my YouTube channel name was Stephen Curry Socks. So for now, we're rolling with the Stephen Curry Socks podcast. That is not a very good name, but for now, that's what we're going with. Aaron, welcome back. Thanks for being on again.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome.
So we're 1 week into the NBA season, and last time I had you on, you went on a long spiel about how the Golden State Warriors, you pretty much said, forget about the season, let's just hand the Warriors the title right now. And, man, opening night, the San Antonio Spurs beat them by like 30 points. I'm sure you saw that game. Anything in that you saw there, change your opinion on them?
No, I'm nothing that I see in early season. Well, I should say few things I see in the early season are going to really change my opinion because the sample is going to be so small in the first 2.5 games of the year. I think that there being some small amount of growing pains from a team like this is not that unlikely, just dealing with kind of like egos and where to be and et cetera, et cetera. You're going to see less from this team than the Heat, I think, from a few seasons ago. I believe they started out not great. I don't know if it was in the ballpark of 18-13 or something random like that, or whatever it was, a little bit over 500 through the first 20 games or 25 games or whatever it was. And people were panicking and they had some bad losses, et cetera, et cetera. I think you'll see growing pains like that from this team, but less. I would expect them to be humming, a few months into the season, which is definitely sooner than most teams like this gel. And also that said, the Spurs, even with the addition of Pau Gasol, are just a machine. They bring it every single night. They've got they just, Pop's kind of baseline for how hard the Spurs play and how well they play on defense and et cetera every single night is so incredibly high that it doesn't completely surprise me that they would get a win here, because people forget that the Spurs won 67 last year. The Spurs were a top 5 all-time team last year, and they probably stayed almost that good or about that good in the offseason. So that's sort of what you're seeing here, I think.
It sounds like you're saying it was more of a Spurs being so great than a problem with the Warriors type thing. Specifically, I think Kawhi just reminded us, he was like, oh, yeah, you have a lot of talent over there, but I'm still, perhaps one of the best, if not the best players in the league. And, he was pretty clearly the best player on the court that game.
I think that's correct. I think the Spurs are still really good. And I think that any faltering from the Warriors or missed shots or miscommunication or bad transition defense, they were really bad in transition. That's what people have been harping on. I think that's correct. Bad transition defense. And it could be a situation where maybe having Harrison Barnes or Andrew Bogut is a good example, or all these sort of veteran, more role-playing type players, maybe they just get back better in transition. Maybe Durant has been just spending his entire career admiring his own shots and being like the third or fourth guy back in transition. And obviously Steph and Clay and all these guys are sort of all used to being the third or fourth guy back in transition. Maybe it's not something Zaza excels at. Maybe Draymond is chasing too many offensive rebounds. And all of a sudden you're just a day late and a dollar short. If you miss shots, there's a feedback loop. You miss shots, the other team gets a fast break opportunity. And it's not even, transition doesn't have to be running up the court and getting a layup. Transition can just be, we push it so that we're not walking the ball up the court. And from that comes some secondary offense where 2 Golden State players didn't communicate on who's got who. And therefore in secondary break, we get an open 3. It could be as simple as that. So that was something that's ailed them so far early in the NBA season. That seems to be a pretty correctable thing. So I would expect them to correct that relatively quickly. And then otherwise, like we just said, Spurs are good. Spurs make you pay for mistakes. Kawhi is incredibly good. In fact, I would probably say Kawhi is my MVP pick right now.
Really? Interesting. Let's obviously this is something I wanted to talk about. We didn't, in our season preview, we didn't really get into MVP that much. And I think this is a super interesting year for it because a lot of the names you see being thrown out, Russell Westbrook, I think is, according to sportsbooks, I have it written down here. Yeah, he's plus 200, which is the current leader among anyone. The Thunder just aren't going to be good enough for him to win MVP, it seems. I forget the stat. I'm paraphrasing here. There's some stat I saw, which is like in the last X number of years, 25 years, every MVP has been on either the first or second place team in their conference except one, which was like Michael Jordan, and his team got third that year. So in other words, like the Thunder aren't going to get the 7th seed and have Russell Westbrook win the MVP. And when you start to look at the candidates, it's really hard to come up with someone whose team is going to be great and is going to put forth the individual numbers to do it with, you know, Steph and Kevin Durant splitting a lot of the vote. LeBron's, you know, kind of takes it easy in the regular season. You're looking at Anthony Davis, Paul George, types of players, Harden, Westbrook, who just aren't going to have the type of team success. So, yeah, Kawhi does seem to be a good pick. He's 10-1 at sportsbooks. They have Russ number 1 at plus 200, Curry and LeBron at plus 450, and then Brow, Durant, and Harden, and Kawhi all at plus 1,000. So, yeah, you can get some good price on them, I guess. I kind of agree with you, though.
Yeah, I would basically say that Kawhi would be my pick. I agree with you. I think the stat was something like maybe once ever has a team or has a player won MVP from like not a top like 4 seed in their conference. I don't remember what it was, but the bottom line is yes, MVP is generally the best player from the best team or the team that overachieves is probably a better way to put it. I think this year is definitely a year where if either the Pelicans or the Thunder win 50 games, which would be, say, enough for like, you know, the 5 seed or something like that, or the 4 seed in the West, if either of those teams happens to do that, they'll win MVP, in my opinion, because it'll be correlation. It'll be because those guys had a great year. I think the Warriors probably won't win enough regular season games, 65 or 62 or whatever number of regular season games they win that gets them the 1 seed is almost certainly just not going to be enough for people to go, whoa, look at that performance, because life is relative, right? So we're looking at last season's Warriors 73 win team. We're saying, oh my God, Durant came and they won 10 less games. This is terrible. And I think Steph and Durant will both suffer because of that. Now that said, either of them could go on a 20-game tear where they put up efficiency like we've never seen. And even though the voters are kind of stupid, they're a lot smarter than they were 5 years ago and a lot smarter than they were 15 years ago. And so we're definitely going to look at they'll definitely look at sort of, you know, number-breaking efficiency if that does happen. If Durant does just like, you know, have the greatest true shooting season of all time or something like that, then it's possible that's possible. I could see that happening. But the guy who I think fits team will win, because I don't expect either the Pelicans or the Thunder to win 45 games, much less 50. Like I think both those teams are high 30s, low 40s caliber teams. I think unless those teams, I mean, if either of those teams wins like 45 to 47 and they get like the 6, you could see some. I mean, look, let's get this out of the way. Westbrook and Anthony Davis are going to put up some incredible statistics this year, like really incredible raw numbers because of the usage that both have to carry. So I could see that happening. But the guy that really fits everything, team is going to win a ton of games, over 60 for sure. He's going to stand out as clearly the best player on the team. And he's already, I mean, you think about it like this. The season is 82 games or whatever it is. Kawhi is already shown for over 1% of the season that on a national televised stage that he dominated. He was incredibly efficient. So he's already like, that's a relatively big sample size. When you think of like, you know, MVP voters and, you know, the media and the narrative and all these things, you really think of a guy that looked at that Kawhi game and watched that entire game start to finish and said, oh my God, best player on the court in a game with 2 of the best 5 players in the league. So that's got to help him there. And the last guy that I would mention that is really the only guy that bears mentioning, I think. I don't expect the Pacers. The Pacers would have to win over 50 for Paul George to get consideration. He's amazing, but I don't see that as happening. The other guy that kind of I thought fit this, but their team started out bad was Harden. And they've just, they barely beat the Dirkless Mavs twice in a row. And then they lost to the Lakers on opening night. I expected them to be a really good regular season team, and it hasn't quite happened just yet for them. So those are my candidates. 1, Kawhi, probably 2, Harden, 3, Westbrook, Anthony Davis. Those are the guys I expect to care about it, because you've got to play 70 games, right? You've got to actually play a lot of games. So
yeah, I'd agree with all that. I know we were both on record in our season preview saying how much we like the Rockets over, I should say. We don't look great on that so far. I would also throw Damian Lillard into that group, in the Harden Westbrook group. He's going to have insane usage this year, put up a ton of shots, and his bulk numbers could really stand out. I agree with a lot of what you said. It basically comes down to which of those guys teams overachieve. I would also throw LeBron's name out there just because, like you said, it's really narrative based. And last year in the final, a lot of people are going to look at last year's finals performance and kind of be like, yeah, other people put up the best regular season numbers, but LeBron proved he really is the best player, and they want to give him like an ex post facto award for that performance almost. So I could see him getting it for that reason. But yeah, really a wide open year, pretty interesting. And do you think there's actually – so we both agree, Kawhi, we have him at number 1. Usually these MVP bets are terrible actual bets because they're so heavily juiced. Is Kawhi at 10-1 actually a good bet? It seems like it might be to me.
Yeah, I think it might be. I would say that they probably have low limits and they're heavily juiced. And while we're saying he's the favorite, I certainly don't think he's more than like 25% to win it or something insane. He's probably like, 18% or 16% and still the favorite. So that's who I would pick for MVP. But like you just said, Lillard has gone on record as saying he wants to win MVP. Like that's his goal for the season. And he's pissed. Like he's not he's just, I don't know, guy just plays mad, right? Like he's gotten some all-star game snubs and stuff. Like he plays really angry. And he had another Saturday night primetime performance the other night where he had a game winner and they beat Denver in Denver, which was a pretty good win for them. So he's another guy incredibly similar to Anthony Davis and Russell Westbrook, except that his team is a little better than both of theirs. If they get home court advantage, even in the 4 seed, it will mean that Dame had an incredible season statistically, and people don't take defense into account when or not enough anyways, when picking MVP. So that would be the other guy I would throw into the conversation. But again, it's like an 8-horse race, right? So that's why Kawhi at 10-1 might be a slightly good bet, but not a slam dunk for sure.
Yeah. Man, I would love to see some documentaries or whatever, behind the scenes footage of guys like Damian Lillard who just have this insane work ethic. Like I would love to know what makes a guy like that tick and what goes into making him the competitor he is. Because like you say, he's an assassin, man. He gets better every single year. He adds moves to his arsenal. Just really fun to watch.
Yeah, I would just quickly say to that, like he went to Weber State. And so I think he went to Weber State, right? I don't remember. He went to a small school in the Mountain Valley Conference, I believe.
That sounds right to me. Yeah.
Right. And anyways, but he went to a small school. So probably so everyone overrates themselves, right? If you're the 17th best recruit out of high school, you probably thought you were the 14th best recruit, or you might have thought you were the second best recruit, or you might have thought you were the best, right? Like that's just how sports is incredibly testosterone based. That is very like, oh my God, I've worked so hard, I deserve this, et cetera, et cetera. And so there's a decent chance that Damian Lillard was just not that highly recruited out of high school. I don't know the story. He was probably not that highly recruited out of high school. Maybe he was, the 180th best recruit and he really wanted to go to UCLA, and UCLA didn't even pay him the time of day. And so he was pissed. So he spent a little extra time working in his game. He went to Weber State. I don't know. I remember the narrative and the stories about him coming out of there was that when he got drafted like 7th or 8th overall or whatever it was, there was a lot of hype about him coming out. And the idea was, here's this like kid out of nowhere. He's a hard worker. People just kept mentioning how he got better, and he was old too when he got drafted. He was like 22 or whatever already. But the point was that people just mentioned again and again how much better he got throughout college, and that was looked at as a very positive thing. So you probably just have this kid. I think there was even an article about like how Damian Lillard used to like call up the equipment manager to let him into the gym at 1 a.m. or whatever, right? Like that was a thing that came out. You just have a guy that's mad. He didn't get first team all conference as a freshman, right? I'm not saying he might have, I don't know. Or he got beat out by a senior point guard as a freshman. And you just get a little more angry, and you want to prove people wrong. And then all of a sudden you're just really good because you're also an elite level athlete and you're working 15 or 20% harder than all these other elite level athletes. And at 1 a.m., instead of trying to, Snapchat with some ladies, you're in the gym working on your jumper. You're in the gym working on your free throws. I mean, how many free throws do you think Damian Lillard shot to become like a, 80 whatever % free throw shooter? A lot is the answer. Right.
Right.
And a lot of those were when he was 20 years old at 1 a.m. probably, So anyways, so that would be my anscer to your comment. I'm not sure if that's correct or not, but
yeah, it's pretty crazy that he keeps getting snubbed for stuff too, like the All-Star thing.
That is a funny narrative that he keeps getting snubbed. Yeah.
It's just so much. It's so competitive in the West, though. Like he might not. Like he has to eventually be an All-Star, right? He's so good, but
I mean, yeah, I remember. I don't think he was even one of them. I think it was like Zach Lowe or somebody that went through the All-Stars and wrote down sort of the locks. And there's like 8 locks. There's like 8 guys who, unless they, go through the list. Unless they get injured, Steph Durant. I mean, God. Honestly, the Warriors guys, if they keep winning a lot of games, like even Clay and Draymond at this point in time are such like big names. I don't know if you put them in it, but Steph Durant, Harden, Kawhi, like how many guys you have to get down to like
the Clippers guys, Blake and
the Clippers guys. Yeah, like so if you have like a slightly less big name and your team wins slightly less games, which is always kind of going to happen unless they have a good schedule or get off to a fast start. Yeah, I mean, if you're a few, you have to leap some guys somehow, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I don't envy the people that actually have to narrow it down, which I guess is what everyone. It's just how's it work? It's fans vote the starters and then coaches do the reserves. Or do I have that backwards?
I think you've got it right. I'm pretty sure you've got it right. And then coaches pick alternates. I'm relatively certain as well. Because like the last few years, there's somebody's gotten injured and like a Horford got in or something like that, or someone got injured and Pau Gasol got in. Like those have happened. Those things have happened in the last few years. So I'm pretty sure that's how that happens.
Right. All right. Let's move on to one last thing I wanted to discuss with you today is on the season preview that we did last week. There was an interesting topic where you mentioned quite a few times about teams rushing the rebuild or just general timeline of how teams that have a lot of young talent, teams like Orlando, Minnesota, Milwaukee, how you would like to see them go about. Let's dive into that again. Any specific thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of an economics thing. This is something that probably a lot of people have a good idea about already. Basically, you just have this situation where incentives are very different for all parties involved. Incentives for the, honestly, I'm not like incentives in the NBA are money based primarily and are not often just let's win championships. Oftentimes it's let's win as many games as possible as soon as possible. And to further the poor incentive system, you have a guy like the Magic GM, Hennigan, I think, who really needs to make the playoffs to keep his job, basically. Because as an owner, so let's start from the top. As an owner, you hire, or an ownership group or whatever, you hire a general manager. And the general manager's goal is what exactly? To win games, to make money, to get the team into the playoffs, or to win championships. There's a lot of different things that the goal could be.
Basically, to make the owner happy.
Exactly right. Yeah. So like a lot of times, so you have like Herb Cole, who with the Bucks, I think recently sold 2 or 3 years ago. But 2 or 3 years ago, and this is kind of funny because Tobias Harris has been twice involved in these dumps. 2 or 3 years ago, Herb Cole gave up a promising rookie, Tobias Harris. I think it was a late first, early second round pick. He just had he was having like a decent rookie year. He might have even been his second year. I can't remember. I think it was rookie year though. I don't know. Anyways, promising young player, literally traded him for 2 months of JJ Redick because they wanted to push really hard to get the 8 seed because he's old and you can't win the championship unless you make the playoffs. And he probably thought we can't win the championship. Well, not in the playoffs, which was a good thought by him. So he traded for JJ Redick, a good shooting guard, like, a league average shooting guard, probably someone they needed on that team. Nice. They pushed, they made the playoffs. They promptly got extinguished in the first round, 4-0. So he got 2 home playoff games out of it. They got smoked. And what happened? Instead of having a promising young player, Tobias Harris, on their team, JJ Redick was like, yo, I'm not re-signing in Milwaukee. Obviously, why would I re-sign in Milwaukee? And then he went and re-signed a deal with he went and signed a deal with the Clippers, or I think it was like a sign and trade with the Clippers or something in free agency, right? So you have JJ Redick, trading for 2 months of JJ Redick as like an example of the owner is old. The owner's literally so old that he thinks he might die at any second. So he forces a trade to do anything to get them into the playoffs. And by doing that, he makes their franchise considerably worse. They go from having, who knows how this would have all fit into their scheme of things with drafting Giannis, et cetera, et cetera. But basically, you go from having a decent young 22-year-old or something to having a 26-year-old who is probably like 8% to re-sign anyways. And even if you do re-sign him, you probably have to overpay him. So that's one example of a terrible trade. And numerous others have been made around the deadline to save jobs. But the idea is you have a poor incentive system. Guys, general managers try to save their jobs by trading for short-term success. Brian Colangelo did it when he was with the Raptors, and he traded for Rudy Gay.
Right. Well, how do you – let me interrupt real quick. If you have an old owner, and obviously there are many causes of why a team might be in win-now mode, but one such cause is definitely having an owner who literally, like you said, might be like, I'm going to die maybe any day. Who knows? I love that we're just exaggerating like that, but
I don't think we are, for the record. I think he's really like insanely old. I mean, he sold the team. He might be dead. I think he's senile or something. I'm serious.
To be fair, it's perfectly reasonable. I mean, if you're super old and you own a team, I would want to win now too, right?
It's reasonable. I would agree it's reasonable, yeah.
Yeah, but how do you change that incentives program? Okay, 10 years from now, Aaron Jones has been hired as a general manager, but you happen to be working for a 90-year-old owner who wants to make a JJ Redick-esque deal. What do you say to him to try to convince him that, hey,
you just can't get into a situation like that. I mean, it's tough to say that I would turn down any general manager job, but I don't think I would want to be in a situation where I had to sort of be a puppet like that and I would fail, and I could potentially fail. So when Sam Hinkie got the job with the 76ers a few years ago, he said, hey, you guys are mediocre. And they were supposedly a group of like relatively young hedge fund guys. And they were like, okay, so what do we do to like really bring in the sustainable big bucks and really win championships? That's what we want to do. And he said, you tear it down. You rip off all of these other teams that want to win now, the Pelicans, the Magic, all these other teams who are going to make negative EV deals, and the Kings, who need to win right now for whatever reason. And you can sell for like $1.50 on the dollar prime guys who people have an idea will make them better right now for future assets. Like that's the way the incentive system works. The future is more unpredictable. Therefore, those assets are worth less than the present. It's actually a very interesting incentive structure. If I can just go through the whole thing, you have future assets which are worth less than present assets. But after you make the draft pick, because there is a certainty about it, there's sort of a new car, drive it off the lot price. So an example is the Celtics have all these picks and they have 5 or 6 draft picks every single year. And they've got these Nets future first and the pick swaps and all these different things. And then what happens is they pick their 15th pick this year. I don't even remember who it was, Yabusele or somebody. Is it this dude was it the French guy? I think it was. And as soon as they picked him, a bunch of front offices probably went, I wasn't considering that idiot until number 35, which is true, by the way. And as soon as they pick him, that asset of this young player is no longer worth as much. So it's this very interesting kind of cyclical, but not quite really situation where future assets are worth more than current assets. And then once you pick that future asset and it becomes a current asset, it's then worth less. It's a really interesting sort of system. And then sort of your guys are worth more. The guys that you signed to deals, your draft picks, et cetera, are worth more to you than to anybody else. Anyways, it's an interesting system. But what I would do is get an owner that understands this is a rebuild. In Sam Hinkie's case, the owners knew this was a rebuild. He said, in order to get good, I've got to trade away these mediocre players. I've got to let Andre Iguodala walk. I've got to gamble on a guy like Andrew Bynum, who might be better than we think, but has health issues, which failed, but they gambled on him. I've got to trade away just anything that we think is mediocre and is not championship-based. We need to trade away to get stars, because the way that every championship has been made in the last 30, 40 years has been with a top 5 player in the league, with the exception of those Pistons teams, who honestly, people argue that Ben Wallace was a top 5 player in the league that year. Probably not, but there are people that think there are metrics that he was like the 3rd best player in the league that year. Whatever, who cares? They were really good players. The bottom line is, a lot of championships have been won, the vast majority with a top 5 player. So to get that, you draft Joel Embiid or Ben Simmons or somebody like that, and that's what the owners okayed. So my answer to your question is, get an owner who gets it and okays that we need to get future assets to turn into present assets to win championships.
Yeah, a few things on what you said there. Just real quick regarding the Pistons, I would agree that I think Wallace was like a fringe top 5 player that year, and I think Rasheed and Billups were like both top 20 players that year. Those Pistons are actually really interesting teams in that the general public seemed to view them as this 5-man unit with 5 guys who were all like equally above average, when in reality, I think Prince and Hamilton were both quite overrated. They were solid starters, but like nowhere near, elite championship level players on, starting type players. Whereas the other 3, both Wallace's and Billups, were just tremendously underrated players that, were true championship pieces. Another thing I wanted to add was in regards to, you were talking about the value of future assets. Another interesting aspect is, I think, just due to the fact that everyone is naturally overrates themselves, trading for another team's future pick is almost always valuable, because that team's going to assume that they're going to be better than they actually are. So you're getting better value for that pick than they might assume. Does that make sense?
Yeah. That
everyone
makes
has a tendency to overrate themselves when you're trading for a team's first rounder next year, basically. I think there's a market. You can take advantage of a bunch of teams who think they're going to be good, and you analyze them, are like, no way, this team's going to suck.
I mean, the most obvious example of that recently is that I mean, let me just, I'm not gonna give too much love because it would turn into a boring podcast, but Sam Hinkie was just the all-time great. I mean, Sam Hinkie he embarrassed these guys. Sam Hinkie was just like, he was just like, he understood it. He understood expected value. He understood the way all these assets work in trades. And I mean, he ripped off the Kings so bad in the salary dump trade they made in order to sign like Marco Bellinelli and whoever else last summer. He traded and we also got Stauskas, who's not any good, but he's been okay this year, actually, so far. I'd probably accept his rookie option just on the fact that he's been okay in a small sample size this year. So he traded. So this is not a cap show, but the gist of it is the Kings wanted to clear cap space. The Kings had some bad contracts on the books. So the Kings traded away some dead contracts to the 76ers in exchange for Nick Stauskas and the right to 2 pick swaps, I believe, and maybe a future first also. Anyways, but the gist of it was I think it was last year or maybe it's this year, in 2 different seasons, the Philadelphia 76ers have a right to swap with the Kings if the Kings pick is higher than the 76ers. And so the 76ers could see, hey, 3 years from now, the Kings are making terrible decisions. They're probably going to be awful. In 3 years from now, Embiid might be healthy. We might make the frickin' playoffs. And he was correct. I mean, in a few years, the 76ers are probably going to have like the 15th pick, and the Kings are going to have like the 5th pick, and they're just going to get to swap it and jump 10 spots because of Hinkie's foresight in this matter. And that's one of just like, 24 moves that Sam Hinkie won. And obviously on the margins, he might've made some mistakes, and he probably, should have made the optics look a little bit better. But I mean, really, he just like won GMing of all, he just won GMing. And I don't know if you heard this the other day, but did you see that they were chanting "trust the process" while Embiid was at the free throw line? Did you see that?
No, I didn't hear that. That's awesome though. It sounds like what you're basically saying, and I agree with all this, is that there's a lot of value to having a front office and coaching staff that's all on the same page with regards to general plan and methodology of evaluating players, if that makes sense. It seems like the vast majority of teams have a lot of conflicting voices. You might have an owner who wants to win now, a coach who, really values, high character leadership guys, some stat guys who really want to play the guys who, the analytics say to play. And you have all these voices who they don't really agree. They don't speak the same language. They're not approaching the problems with the same voice. And it sounds like you're saying when you get a front office and an ownership and a coaching staff that is all on the same page as the 76ers were when they were tanking, that you can really take advantage of teams that have a lot of conflicting voices and that don't have as clear of a goal. I guess the follow-up to that is, well, one, is that a fair summary of your position? And two, how do you deal with that in actuality then, in practice? Because you can't just always walk into a situation where the owner is, everyone's on the same page. How do you deal with those conflicting voices in a front office?
I mean, that's why you've had failure thus far, right? Because the only way for an owner to really tell how the team is doing is by wins and losses, right? I mean, what other metric, I guess you could use like ESPN's ranking of how NBA franchises are going forward, because I think they do that. I think Hinkie actually referenced that in the letter where they went from 28th to 26th to 23rd to 14th or something like that while he was there. I think he referenced that, but that's kind of that's probably an accurate metric, but that's kind of a strange metric to use. The bottom line is it's really difficult for an owner who's not a basketball expert, even to nearly the degree that either of us are. They're not experts, and they're expected to judge how their general manager is doing based on what exactly, right? I mean, if it's not wins and losses, then what is it? I mean, so in that sense, it's very difficult for an owner to sort of tell what's going on. I mean, to just sort of know, and if that's the case, then how else can he judge his GM? Unless you get a GM who's already got a track record of doing an excellent job, like Masai in Toronto, and give him a big contract, or unless you're good friends with the owners and you've had success and the owner really trusts your decision-making process, no matter what, your job's on the line. I mean, an average GM lifespan might be 5 to 7 years or something like that, and it's shorter for others. And the idea is you've got that much time to not mess up your draft picks, to not have an injury hurt you, to not make bad trades, to not to not strike out in free agency. And eventually you're going to get desperate and do sort of what Hennigan is doing in Orlando and make some win now moves, trading young Oladipo for probably very old Serge Ibaka and all these different things that wind up essentially hamstringing the franchise going forward. And the teams that have the teams like the Spurs that have a lot of security, job security, are going to be the ones that prosper in the long run because they're able to consistently not make win now moves. And so that's, to answer your question, you need the coach, the GM, and the front office and the owner to all be on the exact same page. And to do that, I don't know, you need guys that are good friends or something. I mean, really, it's tough. It's like you just need them all to trust each other. And in a cycle where everyone's job is on the line by the person above them and they have to perform, it's sort of like how teachers have to hit certain test scores. In that incentive system where you really have to show right now improvement because that's the only manner to judge people, you'll basically have failure. I mean, there's nothing else really to say. You'll have mistakes by the coach, mistakes by the GM, etc., all because the incentive system isn't perfect.
Right. I would agree with that. And I would add on top another issue complicating the matter is that people still just don't understand variance, really. Like, if I was crafting a perfect, front office, an NBA front office, one of the main things I would want every person working for me to have would be a proper understanding of variance and sample size, and people to not be like, let's not listen to this guy because he's made 2 bad calls in a row, he must be wrong type thinking, which unfortunately permeates so much of the current way we analyze the sport. Like we look at like draft picks. For a while, like one example that pops in my mind is the Oklahoma City Thunder must be good at drafting. After all, look, they got Ibaka, Durant, Harden, Westbrook. Look at all those great draft picks. And you look at the fact that like there's such variance in making like 4 or 5 draft picks. If you ask yourself how many draft picks will we actually need to see a general manager make in order for us to really evaluate him, it would be like you would need to see like 10,000 draft picks. Like it would be a sample size that we'll never actually get. And so we're stuck really just guessing on a lot of, you have to evaluate the methodology. And like you're saying, the people who own the teams aren't really, they don't know how to actually evaluate the methodology. So you're stuck being overly results oriented.
Agreed.
Yeah. All right. Should we end it there? Anything else you want to leave the people with, Aaron?
No, I don't think so. Happy Halloween.
Awesome. Yeah, like I said, I'm going to be doing the SCS podcast semi-regularly now. I'm going to be having guests on, and I'm also going to be doing lots of viewers' questions segments. So get at me on Twitter, at Asani Fisher. Tweet at me any questions. I will also probably open up a thread on Roto Grinders, and you can ask some questions in there. Aaron, people can find you at Twitter. What is your handle again?
AE Jones Lego, AEJONESLEGGO.
All right, awesome. Happy Halloween, everyone.